May it please the tribunal. We had just completed the reading of the affidavit executed by Dr. Wilhelm Jager at the noon recess. The conditions which were described in this affidavit were not confined to the Krupp factories alone, but existed throughout Germany. And we turn to a report of the Polish Main Committee made to the administration of the General Government Poland, document number R-103, which has the number 204 as its number for the United States exhibit. This document is dated the 17th day of May, 1944, and describes the situation of the Polish workers in Germany. And I wish to refer particularly to page 2 of the English translation, starting with paragraph 2. In the German text, it appears at page 2, paragraph 2 also. And quoting from the document, it reads, "The cleanliness of many overcrowded camp rooms is contrary to the most elementary requirements. Often there is no opportunity to obtain warm water for washing. Therefore, the cleanest parents are unable to maintain even the most primitive standard of hygiene for their children, or often even to wash their only set of linen. A consequence of this is the spreading of scabies, which cannot be eradicated. We receive imploring letters from the camps of Eastern workers and their prolific families beseeching us for food. The quantity and quality of camp rations mentioned therein, the so-called fourth grade of rations, is absolutely insufficient. Is absolutely insufficient to maintain the energies spent in heavy work. 3.5 kilogram of bread weekly and a thin soup at lunchtime, cooked with swedes or other vegetables, without any meat or fat, with a meager addition of potatoes, now and then is a hunger ration for a heavy worker. Sometimes punishment consists of starvation, which is inflicted. That is, for the refusal to wear the badge, East. Such punishment has the result that workers faint at work. Klosterdijk camp, Grainheim, Saxony. The consequence is complete exhaustion, an ailing state of health, and tuberculosis. The spreading of tuberculosis among the Polish factory workers is a result of the deficient food rations meted out in the community camps because energy spent in heavy work cannot be replaced. The call for help which reaches us brings to light starvation and hunger, severe stomach intestinal trouble, especially in the case of children, resulting from the insufficiency of food, which does not take into consideration the needs of children. Proper medical treatment or care for the sick are not available in the mass camps. The end of the quotation. We now refer to page 3 of this same document, and particularly to the first paragraph. In the German text, it appears at page 5, paragraph 1. In addition to these bad conditions, there is lack of systematic occupation for and supervision of these hosts of children, which affects the life of prolific families in the camps. The children left to themselves without schooling or religious care must run wild and grow up illiterate. Idleness in rough surroundings may and will create unwanted results in these children. An indication of the awful conditions this may lead to is given by the fact that in the camps for Eastern workers, Camp for Eastern Workers Waldlust, Post Office Lauf, Pegnitz, there are cases of 8-year-old delicate and undernourished children put to forced labor and perishing from such treatment. The fact that these bad conditions dangerously affect the state of health and the vitality of the workers is proved by the many cases of tuberculosis found in very young people returning from the Reich to the general government as unfit for work. Their state of health is usually so bad that recovery is out of the question. The reason is that a state of exhaustion resulting from overwork and a starvation diet is not recognized as an ailment until the illness betrays itself by high fever and fainting spells. Although some hostels for unfit workers have been provided as a precautionary measure, one can only go there when recovery may no longer be expected. Neumarkt in Bavaria. Even there, the incurables waste away slowly, and nothing is done even to alleviate the state of the sick by suitable food and medicines. There are children there with tuberculosis whose cure would not be hopeless, and men in their prime who, if sent home in time to their families in rural districts, might still be able to recover. No less suffering is caused by the separation of families when wives and mothers of small children are away from their families and sent to the Reich for forced labor. And finally, from page 4 of the same document, starting with the first paragraph, in the German text it appears at page 7, paragraph 4. If under these conditions there is no moral support, such as is normally based on regular family life, then at least such moral support which the religious feelings of the Polish population require should be maintained and increased. The elimination of religious services, religious practice, and religious care from the life of the Polish workers, the prohibition of church attendance at a time when there is a religious service for other people, and other measures show a certain contempt for the influence of religion on the feelings and opinions of the workers. End of the quotation.
Can you tell us who the Polish Central Committee were? Or, I mean, how they were founded?
Well, insofar as we are aware, it was a committee apparently set up by the Nazi state when it occupied Poland to work in some sort of cooperation with it during the days of the occupation. We don't know the names of the members, and we haven't any more specific information.
Is it a captured document?
It is a captured document, yes. All of the documents that I am presenting in connection with this case are, excepting the Netherlands government's report and one or two other official reports, the Deuce affidavit and such other matters. That particular document has just been called to my attention, was captured by the United States Third Army. Particularly harsh and brutal treatment was reserved for workers imported from the conquered Eastern territories. As we have illustrated, they did indeed live in bondage, and they were subjected to almost every form of degradation, quartered in stables with animals, denied the right of free worship, and the ordinary pleasures of human society. Illustrative of this treatment is document EC-68, bearing USA Exhibit number 205. Now, this document, EC-68, bears the title Directives on the Treatment of Foreign Farm Workers of Polish Nationality, issued by the Minister for Finance and Economy of Baden, Germany, on the 6th of March, 1941. We don't know his name, and nor have we been able to ascertain it. Quoting from the English text of this document, from the beginning. The agencies of the Reich Food Administration, State Peasant Association of Baden, have received the result of the negotiations with the higher SS and police officer in Stuttgart on 14 February 1941 with great satisfaction. Appropriate memoranda have already been turned over to the district peasants' associations. Below, I promulgate the individual regulations as they have been laid down during the conference and how they are now to be applied accordingly. 1. Fundamentally, farm workers of Polish nationality no longer have the right to complain, and thus no complaints may be accepted anymore by any official agency. The farm workers of Polish nationality may not leave the localities in which they are employed and have a curfew from 1 October to 31 March from 2,000 hours to 600 hours, and from 1 April to 30 September from 2,100 hours to 500 hours. The use of bicycles is strictly prohibited. Exceptions are possible for riding to the place of work in the field if a relative of the employer himself is present. The visit of churches, regardless of faith, is strictly prohibited, even when there is no service in progress. Individual spiritual care by clergymen outside of the church is permitted. Visits to theaters, motion pictures, or other cultural entertainment are strictly prohibited for farm workers of Polish nationality. The visit of restaurants is strictly prohibited to farm workers of Polish nationality, except for one restaurant in the village, which will be selected by the Rural Councillor's Office, Landratstadt. and then only 1 day per week. The day which is determined as the day to visit the restaurant will also be determined by the Landrat sum. This regulation does not change the curfew regulation mentioned above under number 2. Gatherings of farm workers of Polish nationality after work is prohibited, whether it is on other farms, in the stables, or in the living quarters of the Poles. The use of railroads, buses, or other public conveyances by farm workers of Polish nationality is prohibited. Permits to leave the village may only be granted in very exceptional cases by the local police authority, mayor's office. However, in no case may it be granted if he wants to visit a public agency on his own, whether it is a labor office or the district peasants association, or whether he wants to change his place of employment. Arbitrary change of employment is strictly prohibited. The farm workers of Polish nationality have to work daily so long as the interest of the enterprise demands it and as it is demanded by the employer. There are no time limits to the working time. Every employer has the right to give corporal punishment toward farm workers of Polish nationality if instructions and good words fail. The employer may not be held accountable in any such case by an official agency. Farm workers of Polish nationality should, if possible, be removed from the community of the home, and they can be quartered in stables, etc. No remorse whatever should restrict such action. Report to the authorities is compulsory in all cases. When crimes have been committed by farm workers of Polish nationality, which are to sabotage the enterprise or slow down work, for instance, unwillingness to work, impertinent behavior, it is compulsory even in minor cases. An employer who loses his Pole, who must serve a longer prison sentence because of such a compulsory report, will receive another Pole from the competent labor office on request with preference. In all other cases, only the state police is still competent. For the employer himself, severe punishment is contemplated if it is established that the necessary distance from farm workers of Polish nationality has not been kept. The same applies to women and girls. Extra rations are strictly prohibited. Non-compliance to the right tariffs for farm workers of Polish nationality will be punished by the competent labor office by the taking away of the worker. The women of the conquered territories were led away against their will to serve as domestics. And the defendant Saukel described this program in his own words, which appear in document 016-PS, already offered in evidence as USA Exhibit 168. PS, and particularly page 8 and the 4th paragraph of the English text. In the German text, it appears at page 10, paragraph 1. And I quote directly, "In order to relieve considerably the German housewife, especially the mother with many children, and the extremely busy farm woman, and in order to avoid..."
Page 7. Page 7, not page 8.
Oh, I'm sorry. Page 7. Page 7. And in order to avoid any further danger to their health, the Fuhrer also charged me with the procurement of 400,000 to 500,000 selected, healthy, and strong girls from the territories of the East for Germany. End of the quotation. Once captured, once forced to become laborers in Germany or workers in Germany, these Eastern women, by order of this defendant Saukel, were bound to the household to which they were assigned, permitted at the most 3 hours of freedom a week, and denied the right to return to their homes. And we now refer to document number 3044 BPS. That's USA Exhibit number 206. It is the document is a decree issued by the defendant Saukel containing instructions for housewives concerning Eastern household workers. And I ask that the court take judicial notice of the original decree, which appears on pages 592 and 593 of the second volume of a publication of the Zentra Laverlag of the NSDAP, entitled Verfügungen and Ordnungen bekanntgeben. And we quote from the first paragraph of the English translation of a portion of the decree as follows. There is no claim for free time. Female domestic workers from the East may, on principle, leave the household only to take care of domestic tasks. Page 1 of the English text, 3044B-PS.
Oh, yes, I got it.
As a reward for good work, however, they may be given the opportunity to stay outside the home without work for 3 hours once in a week. This leave must end with the onset of darkness, at the latest at 2000 hours. It is prohibited to enter restaurants, movies, or other theaters, and similar establishments provided for German or foreign workers. Attending church is also prohibited. Special events may be arranged for Eastern domestics in urban homes by the German Workers' Front. For Eastern domestics in rural homes by the Reich Food Administration with the German Women's League. Outside the home, the Eastern domestic must always carry her work card as a personal pass. Vacations, return to homes. Vacations are not granted as yet. The recruiting of Eastern domestics is for an indefinite period. End of the quotation. Always over these enslaved workers was the shadow of the Gestapo and of the concentration camp. Like with other major programs of the Nazi conspirators, the guards of the SS and Himmler's methods of dealing with people were the instruments employed for enforcement. On the subject of slave laborers, a secret order dated the 20th of February, 1942, issued by Reichsfuhrer SS Himmler to the SD and security police officers concerning Eastern workers spells out the violence which was applied against them. It is our document 3040 PS. Which is USA Exhibit number 207. And I ask this court to take judicial notice of the original order, which is published in the Allgemeine Erlassung, Part 2, Section 2A, Roman numeral 3, small letter F, paragraphs 15 to 24, pages rather, 15 to 24. And I wish to quote from page 3 of the English text, starting with paragraph Roman number 3. In the German text, it appears in section 2A, Roman number 3, F, at page 19 of the publication. Combating violations against discipline. 1. According to the equal status of the manpower from the original Soviet Russian territory with prisoners of war, a strict discipline must be exercised in the quarters and at the working place. Violations against discipline, including work refusal and loafing at work, will be fought exclusively by the secret state police. The smaller cases will be settled by the leader of the guard according to instruction of the state police administration officers, with measures as provided for in the enclosure. To break acute resistance, the guard shall be permitted to use also physical power against the manpower. But this may be done only for a cogent cause. The manpower should always be informed about the fact that they will be treated decently when conducting themselves with discipline and accomplishing good work. In severe cases, that is, in such cases where the measures at the disposal of the leader of the guard do not suffice, the state police office has to act with its means. Accordingly, they will be treated, as a rule, only with strict measures. That is, with transfer to a concentration camp or with special treatment. The transfer to a concentration camp is done in the usual manner. In especially severe cases, special treatment is to be requested at the Reich Security Main Office, stating personnel data and the exact history of the act. Special treatment is hanging. It should not take place in the immediate vicinity of the camp. A certain number of manpower from the original Soviet Russian territory should attend the special treatment. At that time, they are warned about the circumstances which led to this special treatment. Should special treatment be required within the camp for exceptional reasons of camp discipline, this is also to be requested. And I turn now to page 4 of the original text, paragraph Roman number 6. In the German text, it appears at section 2A, Roman numeral 3, F, on page 20. Sexual intercourse is forbidden to the manpower of the original Soviet Russian territory. By means of their closely confined quarters, they have no opportunity for it. For every case of sexual intercourse with German countrymen or women, special treatment is to be requested for male manpower from the original Soviet Russian territory, transferred to a concentration camp for female manpower. And finally, from page 5 of the same document, paragraph Roman numeral 8, and in the German text it appears at section 2, capital A, Roman numeral 3, F, at page 21. Search. Fugitive workers from the original Soviet Russian territory are to be announced principally in the German search book. Furthermore, search measures are to be decreed locally. When caught, the fugitive must receive special treatment. We have said before this tribunal more than once that the primary purpose of the entire slave labor program was, of course, to compel the people of the occupied countries to work for the German war economy. The decree by which the defendant Sauckel was appointed plenipotentiary general for manpower reveals that the purpose of the appointment was to facilitate acquisition of the manpower required for German war industries, and in particular the armaments industry, by centralizing under Sauckel responsibility for the recruitment and allocation of foreign labor and prisoners of war in these industries. We refer to document bearing our number 1666 PS. This document is a decree signed by Hitler, Lammers, and the defendant Keitel. And it's dated the 21st day of March, 1942, appointing the defendant Sauckel the plenipotentiary general for the utilization of labor. I ask that the court take judicial notice of the original decree, which is published at page 179, part 1 of the 1942 Reichsgesetzblatt. Referring to the English text, starting with paragraph 1, as follows, quoting directly. In order to secure the manpower requisite for war industries as a whole, and particularly for armaments, it is necessary that the utilization of all available manpower, including that of workers recruited abroad and of prisoners of war, should be subject to a uniform control, directed in a manner appropriate to the requirements of war industry. And further, that all still incompletely utilized manpower in the Greater German Reich, including the Protectorate, and in the general government, and in the occupied territories, should be mobilized. Reichsstatthalter and Gauleiter Fritz Sauckel will carry out this task within the framework of the 4-year plan as plenipotentiary general for the utilization of labor. In that capacity, he will be directly responsible to the Commissioner for the 4-year plan. Section 3, Wages, and Section 5, Utilization of Labor, of the Reich Labor Ministry, together with their subordinate authorities, will be placed at the disposal of the plenipotentiary general for the accomplishment of his task. Sauckel's success can be measured from a letter which he himself wrote to Hitler on the 15th of April in 1943. and which contains his report on 1 year of his activities. We refer to the document as number 407 PS, Roman numeral 6, which bears USA exhibit number 209. I wish to quote from paragraphs 6 and 9 on page 1 of the English text. In the German text, it appears at page 2, paragraphs 1 and 2. After 1 year's activity as plenipotentiary for the direction of labor, I can report that 3,638,056 new foreign workers were given to the German war economy from 1 April of last year to 31 March of this year. The 3,638,056 are distributed among the following branches of the German war economy. Armament, 1,568,801. Still further evidence of this studied use of this enslaved foreign labor is found again in a report of the Central Planning Board, to which we have referred so many times this morning and yesterday. Another meeting of this Central Planning Board was held on the 16th day of February in 1944. And I refer to our document R124, which contains the minutes of these meetings of the Central Planning Board, which has already been offered as USA Exhibit 179. And I want to refer particularly to page 26. Paragraph 1 of the English text of document R124. It's page 16 and paragraph 2 of the German text. Quoting from the English text, the armament industry employs foreign workmen to a large extent. According to the latest figures, 40%. End of the quotation. Moreover, our document 2520 PS, which is in evidence as USA Exhibit 197, records that according to the Spere Ministry tabulations, as of the 31st of December 1944, approximately 2 million civilian foreign workers were employed directly in the manufacture of armaments and munitions, end products or components. That the bulk of these workers had been forced to come to Germany against their will is made clear by Sauckel's statement, which we quoted from paragraph 3 and page 11 of the document R124. We quoted it this morning. The statement being that of 5 million foreign workers, less than 200,000 or only 200,000 came voluntarily. The defendants Sauckel and Speer and Keitel succeeded in forcing foreign labor to construct military fortifications. Thus, citizens of France, of Holland, and of Belgium were compelled against their will to engage in the construction of the Atlantic Wall. And we refer to our document 556 PS2. Which is United States Exhibit 194. This is a Hitler order dated the 8th day of September, 1942, and it's initialed by the defendant Keitel. Quoting the order directly, it says, "The extensive coastal fortifications which I have ordered to be erected in the area of Army Group West make it necessary that in the occupied territory all available workers should be committed and should give the fullest extent of their productive capacities. The previous allotment of domestic workers is insufficient. In order to increase it, I order the introduction of compulsory labor and the prohibition of changing the place of employment without permission of the authorities in the occupied territories. Furthermore, the distribution of food and clothing ration cards to those subject to labor draft should in the future depend on the possession of a certificate of employment. Refusal to accept an assigned job, as well as abandoning the place of work without the consent of the authorities in charge, will result in the withdrawal of the food and clothing ration cards. The GBA, Deputy General for Arbeitseinsatz, in agreement with the military commander, as well as the Reich Kommissar, will issue the corresponding decrees for execution." End of that quotation. Indeed, the defendant Sauckel boasted to Hitler concerning the contribution of the forced labor program to the construction of the Atlantic Wall by the defendant Speer's organization Todt. And we refer to document 407 PS, Roman numeral 8. Which is USA Exhibit number 195. This document is a letter from the defendant Sauckel to Hitler, dated the 17th day of May, 1943. And I refer to the second and last paragraphs. In addition to the labor allotted to the total German economy by the Arbeitseinsatz since I took office, the organization Todt was supplied with new labor continually. Thus, the Arbeitseinsatz has done everything to help make possible the completion of the Atlantic Wall. End of the quotation. Similarly, Russian civilians were forced into labor battalions and compelled to build fortifications to be used against their own countrymen. In document 031 PS, in evidence as USA Exhibit 171, 171, I'm sorry, which is a memorandum of the Rosenberg Ministry. It was stated in paragraph 1 and page 1 of that document men and women in the theaters of operations have been and will be conscripted into labor battalions to be used in the construction of fortifications. Paragraph 1, page 1.
Of 031? The document 12th of June
031
1944.
PS. 031 PS.
It begins on my page with evacuation of youths from the territory of Army Group Center. That you've read already on the 14th of June 1944, 031, which begins the minister, well, the actual beginning of the paragraph is the Obergruppenführer has given his consent to again submit the matter Hoyakiten.
Yes? This document to which I now make reference is dated 12 June 1944, and it's marked top secret.
Yes.
And begins copy number 1 of 2 copies.
Yes.
Ray evacuation of youths, etc. 1 memorandum. And I was reading from the 5th, in the 5th line down.
Oh, well.
To the greater part.
I've got it now, yes. Yeah.
The men and women in the theaters of operation have been and will be conscripted into labor battalions to be used in the construction of fortifications. In addition, the conspirators compelled prisoners of war to engage in operations of war against their own country and its allies. At a meeting of the Central Planning Board, again, held on February 19, 1943, attended by the defendant Spere and the defendant Saukel and Field Marshal Milch, the following conversation occurred and is recorded in our document R124 at page 32, paragraph 5 of the English text. It is page 20, the last paragraph of the German text. And I quote it. The defendant Saukel speaking. Saukel, if any prisoners are taken, there they will be needed. Milch, we have made a request for an order that a certain percentage of men in the anti-aircraft artillery must be Russians. 50,000 will be taken altogether. 30,000 are already employed as gunners. This is an amusing thing that Russians must work the guns. End of the quotation. We refer now to documents number 3027 and 3028. They bear respectively USA Exhibit 211 for 3027 and 212 for 3028. They'll be found at the very back, I believe, of the document book in a separate manila folder. What? They are official German Army photographs. And if your honors will examine document 3027 PS, the caption states that Russian prisoners of war are acting as ammunition bearers during the attack upon Shudol. Document 3028 PS consists of a series of official German Army photographs taken in July and August 1941, showing Russian prisoners of war in Latvia and the Ukraine being compelled to load and unload ammunition trains and trucks and being required to stack ammunition, all, we say, in flagrant disregard of the rules of international law, particularly Article 6 of the regulations annexed to the Hague Convention, number 4 of 1907, which provides that the tasks of prisoners of war shall have no connection with the operations of war. The use of prisoners of war in the German armament industry was as widespread and as extensive almost as the use of the forced foreign civilian labor. And we refer to document number 3005, PS, which is USA Exhibit 213. This document is a secret letter from the Reichsminister of Labor to the presidents of the regional labor exchange offices, which refers to an order of the defendant Goering to the effect that, and I quote now from paragraph 1 of that document, I'm quoting it directly. Upon personal order of the Reich Marshal, 100,000 men are to be taken from among the French prisoners of war, not yet employed in armament industry, and are to be assigned to the armament industry, parenthesis, airplanes industry, closing the parenthesis. Gaps in manpower supply resulting therefrom will be filled by Soviet prisoners of war. The transfer of the above-named French prisoners of war is to be accomplished by 1 October. The Reich Marshal referred to in that quotation is, of course, the defendant Goering. A similar policy was followed with respect to Russian prisoners of war. The defendant Keitel directed the execution of Hitler's order to use prisoners of war in the German war economy. And I now make reference to our document EC 194, which has USA Exhibit number 214. This document is also a secret memorandum, according to its label, issued from Hitler's headquarters on the 31st of October, 1941. And I read from page 1, paragraphs 1 and 2. Quoting it directly as follows: the lack of workers is becoming an increasingly dangerous hindrance for the future German war and armament industry. The expected relief through discharges from the armed forces is uncertain as to the extent and date, However, its possible extent will by no means correspond to expectations and requirements in view of the great demand. The Fuhrer has now ordered that even the working power of the Russian prisoner of war should be utilized to a large extent by large-scale assignment for the requirements of the war industry. The prerequisite for production is adequate nourishment. Also, very small wages are to be planned for the most modest supply with a few consumers' goods for every day's life, eventual rewards for production. And quoting now from the same document, the paragraphs numbered 2, Roman numeral 2, and Roman numeral 3, and quoting directly, 2, construction and armament industry. A, work units for constructions of all kinds, particularly for the fortification of coastal defenses, concrete workers, unloading units for essential war plants. B, suitable armament factories, which have to be selected in such a way that their personnel should consist in the majority of prisoners of war under guidance and supervision, eventually after withdrawal and other employment of the German workers. And 3, other war industries, A, mining, as under 2B, B, railroad construction units for building tracks, C, agriculture, forestry, enclosed units. The utilization of Russian prisoners of war is to be regulated on the basis of above examples by, to 1, the armed forces, to 2, the Reich Minister for Arms and Ammunition, and the Inspector General for the German Road System, in agreement with the Reich Minister for Labor and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. Deputies of the Reich Minister for Arms and Ammunition are to be admitted to the prisoner of war camps to assist in the selection of skilled workers. End of the quotation. The defendant Goering, at a conference at the Air Ministry on the 7th day of November, 1941, also discussed the use of prisoners of war in the armament industry. And we refer now to our document number 1206 PS. Which bears USA Exhibit number 215. This document consists of top secret notes on Goering's instructions as to the employment and treatment of prisoners of war in many phases of the German war industry. And I wish to quote from paragraph 1 of page 1 and paragraph 4 of page 2 of the English text, and from paragraph 1, page 1, and paragraph 1, page 3 of the German text as follows. The Fuhrer's point of view as to employment of prisoners of war in war industries has changed basically. So far, a total of 5 million prisoners of war, employed so far 2 million. And on page 2, in the interior and the protectorate, it would be ideal if entire factories could be manned by Russian prisoners of war, except the employees necessary for direction. For employment in the interior and the protectorate, the following ought to have priority. At the top, coal mining industry. Order by the Fuhrer to investigate all mines as to suitability for employment of Russians, at times manning the entire plant with Russian laborers. B, transportation, construction of locomotives and cars, repair shops. Railroad repair and industry workers are to be sought out from the prisoners of war. Railroad is most important means of transportation in the East. Armament industries, preferably factories of armor and guns, possibly also construction of parts for airplane engines. Suitable complete sections of factories to be manned exclusively by Russians. For the remainder, employment in columns, use in factories of tool machinery, production of farm tractors, generators, etc. In emergency, erect in individual places barracks for occasional workers, which are used as unloading details and similar purposes. Reich Minister of the Interior through communal authorities. OKW, AWA is competent for the transporting Russian prisoners of war employment through Planning Board for employment of all prisoners of war. If necessary, offices of Reich commissariats. No employment where danger to men or their supply exists, that is, factories exposed to explosives, waterworks, power works, etc. No contact with German population, especially no solidarity. German worker, as a rule, is foreman of Russians. Food is a matter of the 4 years plan. Supply their own food, cats, horses, etc. Clothes, billeting, messing, somewhat better than at home, where part of the people live in caverns. Supply of shoes for the Russians, as a rule, wooden shoes. If necessary, install Russian shoe repair shops. Examination of physical fitness in order to avoid importation of diseases. Clearing of mines, as a rule by Russians, if possible, by selected Russian engineers. End of the quotation. The defendant Goering was not the only one of these defendants who sponsored and applied the policy of using prisoners of war in the armament industry. The defendant Spere also sponsored and applied this same policy of using prisoners of war in the armament industry. And we refer to the document bearing on number 1435 PS, which also carries USA Exhibit number 216. This document is a speech to the Nazi Gauleiters delivered by the defendant Spere on the 24th day of February in 1942. And I wish to read from paragraph 2 of that document, which I quote as follows. I therefore propose to the Fuhrer at the end of December that all my labor force, including specialists, be released for mass employment in the East. Subsequently, the remaining prisoners of war, about 10,000, were put at disposal of the armaments industry by me. End quote. He also reported at the 36th meeting of the Central Planning Board, held on the 22nd day of April in 1943, that only 30% of the Russian prisoners of war were engaged in the armament industry. This the defendant Speer found unsatisfactory. and referring again to document R124, the minutes of the Central Planning Board, and particularly to page 17 of that document. And to paragraph 10 of the English text, and page 14, paragraph 7 of the German text. We find this statement by the defendant Spere, quoting directly. There is a specified statement showing in what sectors the Russian prisoners of war have been distributed. And this statement is quite interesting. It shows that the armaments industry only received 30%. I always complained about this. End of the quotation. And at page 20 of the same document, 124, R124, paragraph 1 on page 20 of the English text, and page 14A, the last paragraph of the German text, the defendant Speer stated, and I quote from that paragraph directly, the 90,000 Russian prisoners of war employed in the whole of the armaments industry are, for the greatest part, skilled men, unquote. The defendant Salko, who was appointed plenipotentiary general for the utilization of labor for the express purpose, among others, of integrating prisoners of war into the German war industry, made it plain that prisoners of war were to be compelled to serve the German armament industry. His labor mobilization program, which is document 016PS, already marked USA Exhibit 168, contains a statement on page 6, paragraph 10 of the English text, and page 9, paragraph 1 of the German text. Page 10 of the English text at paragraph 6. Well, I'm sorry, page 6, paragraph 10, I'm sorry. All prisoners of war, quoting, all prisoners of war from the territories of the West as well as of the East, actually in Germany, must be completely incorporated into the German armament and nutrition industries. Their production must be brought to the highest possible level. End of the quotation. I wish to turn now from the exploitation of foreign labor in general to a rather special Nazi program, which appears to us to have combined the brutality and the purposes of the slave labor program with those of the concentration camp. The Nazis placed Allied nationals in concentration camps and forced them, along with the other inmates of the camps, the concentration camps, to work under conditions which were set to actually exterminate them. This was what we call the Nazi program of extermination through work. In the spring of 1942, These conspirators turned to the concentration camps as a further source of slave labor for the armaments industry. And I refer again to our document, no, it's a new document, R129. R129, bearing USA Exhibit number 217. This document is a letter to Himmler, the Reichsfuhrer SS, and it's dated the 30th day of April 1942 from one of his subordinates, an individual named Pohl, P-O-H-L, an SS Obergrubenführer and a general of the Waffen-SS. And I wish to quote from the first paragraph of the first page of that document. Quoting directly, "Today I report about the present situation of the concentration camps and about measures I have taken to carry out your order of the 3rd March 1942. End of that quotation. And then moving on from paragraphs numbered 1, 2, and 3 on page 2 of the English text, and at page 1 of the German text, we quote as follows, small 1. The war has brought about a marked change in the structure of the concentration camps and has changed their duties with regard to the employment of the prisoners. The custody of prisoners for the sole reasons of security, education, or prevention is no longer the main consideration. The mobilization of all prisoners who are fit for work for purposes of the war now and for purposes of construction in the forthcoming peace come to the foreground more and more. From this knowledge, some necessary measures result with the aim to transform the concentration camps into organizations more suitable for the economic task, whilst they were formerly merely politically interested. For this reason, I have gathered together all the leaders of the former Inspectorate of Concentration Camps, all camp commanders, and all managers and supervisors of work on the 23rd and 24th of April, 1942. I have explained personally to them this new development. I have compiled in the order attached the main essentials, which have to be brought into effect with the utmost urgency if the commencement of work for the purposes of the armament industry is not to be delayed. And that is the end of the quotation. Now, the order referred to in that 3rd paragraph set the framework for a program of relentless exploitation, providing in part as follows, and I now refer to the enclosure appended to the quoted letter, which is also a part of document R129, and found at page 3, paragraphs numbered 4, 5, and 6 of the English text, and page 3 of the German text. 4. The camp commander alone is responsible for the employment of the labor available. This employment must be, in the true meaning of the word, exhaustive, in order to obtain the greatest measure of performance. Work is allotted by the chief of the Department D, centrally and alone. The camp commanders themselves may not accept on their own initiative work offered by third parties and may not negotiate about it. 5, there is no limit to working hours. Their duration depends on the kind of working establishments in the camps and the kind of work to be done. They are fixed by the camp commanders alone. 6, any circumstances which may result in a shortening of working hours, for example, meals, roll calls, have therefore to be restricted to the minimum, which cannot be condensed anymore. It is forbidden to allow long walks to the place of working and noon intervals only for eating purposes. End of the quotation. The armaments production program we have just described was not merely a scheme for mobilizing the manpower potential of the camps. It actually indicated directly, or actually, it was integrated directly into the larger Nazi program of extermination. And I wish to refer at this point to our document bearing the number 654 PS. At the recess time, I had made reference to document number 654 PS, which has the United States exhibit number 218. This document is a memorandum of an agreement between Himmler, the Reichsfuhrer SS, and the Minister of Justice, Dirac. It's dated the 18th day of September, 1942. And the concept of extermination through work, to which I referred shortly before the recess, was embodied in this document. And I wish to quote from page 1 and paragraph 2 of 654 PS. Small figure 2. Quoting directly, the delivery of antisocial elements from the execution of their sentence to the Reichsfuhrer of SS to be worked to death. Persons under protective arrest, Jews, Gypsies, Russians and Ukrainians, Poles with more than 3-year sentences, Czechs and Germans with more than 8-year sentences, according to the decision of the Reich Minister for Justice. First of all, the worst antisocial elements amongst those just mentioned are to be handed over. I shall inform the Fuhrer of this through Reichsleiter Bormann. Now this agreement further, that's the end of that quotation. This agreement further provided in paragraph 14 on page 2 of the English text and page 3, paragraph 14 of the German text as follows. 14. It is agreed that in consideration of the intended aims of the government for the clearing up of the Eastern problems, in future Jews, Poles, Gypsies, Russians and Ukrainians are no longer to be judged by the ordinary courts so far as punishable offenses are concerned, but are to be dealt with by the Reichsfuhrer of SS. This does not apply to civil lawsuits, nor to Poles whose names are announced or entered in the German racial lists. End of the quotation. Now, in September of 1942, the defendant Spere made arrangements to bring this new source of labor within his jurisdiction. Spere convinced Hitler that significant production could be obtained only if the concentration camp prisoners were employed in factories under the technical control of the Speer ministry instead of the control in the camps. In fact, without the defendant Speer's cooperation, we say it would have been most difficult to utilize the prisoners on any large scale for war production, since he would not allocate to Himmler the machine tools and other necessary equipment. Accordingly, it was agreed that the prisoners were to be exploited in factories under the defendant Speer's control. To compensate Himmler for surrendering this jurisdiction to Spere, the defendant Spere proposed, and Hitler agreed, that Himmler would receive a share of the armaments output fixed in relation to the man-hours contributed by his prisoners. The minutes of the defendant Speer's conference with Hitler on the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd days of September of 1942 in document R124, which is USA Exhibit 179. And I wish to refer particularly to page 34 of the English text. These are the defendant Speer's minutes on this conference. And quoting from page 34, I'm sorry, paragraph 36, beginning at the middle of the page. And it's at the top of page 26 in the German text. I quote, "I pointed out to the Fuhrer that apart from an insignificant amount of work, no possibility exists of organizing armament production in the concentration camps because, one, the machine tools required are missing. Two, there are no suitable premises. Both these assets would be available in the armaments industry if use could be made of them by a second shift. The Fuhrer agrees to my proposal that the numerous factories set up outside towns for ARP reasons should release their workers for supplementing the second shift in town factories and should in return be supplied with labor from the concentration camps, also 2 shifts. I pointed out to the Fuhrer the difficulties which I expect to encounter if Reichsfuhrer SS Himmler should be able, as he requests, to exercise authoritative influence over these factories. The Fuhrer, too, does not consider such an influence necessary. The Fuhrer, however, agrees that Reichsfuhrer SS Himmler should draw advantages from making his prisoners available. He should get equipment for his division. I suggest to give him a share in kind, in parenthesis, war equipment, in ratio to the working hours done by his prisoners. A 3 to 5% share is discussed, the equipment also being calculated according to working hours. The Fuhrer would agree to such a solution. The Fuhrer is prepared to order the additional delivery of this equipment and weapons to the SS according to a list submitted to him. End of the quotation. After a demand for concentration camp labor had been created, and after a mechanism had been set up by the defendant Speer for exploiting this labor in armament factories, measures were evolved for increasing the supply of victims for extermination through work. A steady flow was assured by an agreement between Himmler and the Minister of Justice mentioned above, which was implemented by such programs as the following. And I refer to document L61, marked USA Exhibit 177. And I wish to quote from paragraph 3. That document, the tribunal will recall, is the defendant Sauckel's letter dated the 26th of November, 1942, to the presidents of the Landers employment offices. And I wish to quote from paragraph 3 of that letter. Quoting, "The Poles who are to be evacuated as a result of this measure will be put into concentration camps and put to work where they are criminal or asocial elements." End of the quotation. General measures were supplemented by special drives for persons who would not otherwise have been sent to concentration camps.
Didn't you read that this morning?
Yes, I did, Your Honor. I was reading it again with particular reference to this feature of the proof. For example, for reasons of war necessity, Himmler ordered that at least 35,000 prisoners qualified for work should be transferred immediately to concentration camps. And in our document number 1063, PS D, which has USA Exhibit 219,
number 1063D.
This document is a Himmler order dated the 17th of December, 1942. The order provides, and I quote in part, beginning with the first paragraph of that document, "For reasons of war necessity, not to be discussed further here, the Reichsfuhrer SS and Chief of the German Police, on the 14th of December, 1942, has ordered that until the end of January 1943, at least 35,000 prisoners qualified for work are to be sent to the concentration camps. In order to reach this number, the following measures are required. 1. As of now, so far until 1 February 1943, all Eastern workers or such foreign workers who have been fugitives or who have broken contracts and who do not belong to allied, friendly, or neutral states are to be brought by the quickest means to the nearest concentration camps. 2, the commanders and the commandants of the security police and the security service and the chiefs of the state police headquarters will check immediately on the basis of a close and strict ruling, A, the prisons, B, the labor reformatory camps. All prisoners qualified for work, if it is essentially and humanly possible, will be committed at once to the nearest concentration camp according to the following instructions. For instance, also, if penal procedures were to be established in the near future, only such prisoners who, in the interest of investigation procedures, are to remain absolutely in solitary confinement can be left there. Every single laborer counts. End of the quotation. Measures were adopted to ensure that this extermination through work was practiced with maximum efficiency. For subsidiary concentration camps were established near the important war plants. The defendant Spere has admitted that he personally toured Upper Austria and selected sites for concentration camps near various munitions factories in the area. I'm about to refer to the transcript of an interrogation under oath of the defendant Albert Spere.
Mr. Dodd, do you understand that last document you read, 1063 PS, to refer to prisoners of war or prisoners in ordinary prisons, or what?
We understood it to refer to prisoners in ordinary prisons.
Last sentence, I think, yeah, two. Last sentence,
Now, this interrogation, in view of the tribunal's ruling this morning, I think I should state that with respect to this interrogation of the defendant Spere, we had provided the defendant's counselors with the entire text in German. It happens to be a brief interrogation, and so we were able to complete that translation, and it has been in their information center.
Mr. Dodd, is there any certification by the interrogator as to the English translation?
There is, Your Honor. There's a certification at the end of the interrogation by the interrogator and by the interpreter. And the reporter as well, and the reporter. There are 3 certifications.
I think the best course will be, in those circumstances, to receive the interrogation now. You will have an opportunity by calling the defendant to show in what way he alleges or you allege that the interrogation is inaccurately translated.
Yeah. Thank you.
May I respectfully refer, Your Honors, to the last document in the document book. Well, next to the last, I guess. The next to the last document. It's 4 pages from the end. 4 pages from the end.
It is page. Which page do you refer to?
I refer to the page bearing the number 16. It's the last answer on page 24, I have it, page 16, rather, of the English text of the transcript of the interrogation. And it's page 21 of the German text. The answer quoted is, the fact that we were anxious to use workers from concentration camps in factories and to establish small concentration camps near the factories in order to use the manpower that was available then was a general fact. But it did not only come up in connection with this trip.
Well, I think I ought to say to defendant's counsel that if he had waited until he'd heard that piece of evidence read, he would have seen that it was quite unnecessary to make any objection.
The defendant Goering endorsed this use of concentration camp labor and asked for more. And we refer to our document 1584 PS, Part 1, which has USA Exhibit number 221. This document is a teletype message from the defendant Goering to Himmler, dated the 14th day of February, 1944. And I quote from the document, beginning with the second sentence. At the same time, I ask you to put at my disposal as great a number of concentration camp, parentheses, KZ, convicts as possible for air armament, as this kind of manpower proved to be very useful according to previous experience. The situation of the air war makes subterranean transfer of industry necessary. For work of this kind, concentration camp, KZ convicts can be especially well concentrated at work and in the camp. End of the quotation. The defendant Spere subsequently assumed responsibility for this program. And Hitler promised Spere that if the necessary labor for the program could not be obtained, then 100,000 Hungarian Jews would be brought in by the SS. Speer's record of conferences with Hitler on April 6th and April 7th of 1944 is found in document R124, which is USA Exhibit 179. And referring to page 36 of the English text of that document. And page 29 of the German text, as follows, directly quoted. Suggested to the Fuhrer that due to lack of builders and equipment, the second big building project should not be set up in German territory, but in close vicinity to the border on suitable soil, preferable on gravel base and with transport facilities on French, Belgian, or Dutch territory. The Fuhrer agrees to this suggestion if the works could be set up behind a fortified zone. For the suggestion of setting this plant up in French territory speaks mainly the fact that it would be much easier to procure the necessary workers. Nevertheless, the Fuhrer asks an attempt be made to set up the second works in a safer area, namely in the Protectorate. If it should prove impossible there, too, to get hold of the necessary workers, the Fuhrer himself will contact the Reichsfuhrer SS and will give an order that the required 100,000 men are to be made available by bringing in Jews from Hungary, stressing the fact that the building organization was a failure. The Fuhrer demands that these works must be built by the OT exclusively, and that the workers should be made available by the Reichsfuhrer SS. He wants to hold a meeting shortly in order to discuss details with all the men concerned. End of the quotation. The brutal and the inhumane and the degrading treatment inflicted on the Allied nationals and on other victims of the concentration camps, while they were indeed being literally worked to death, is described in a document labeled L159, which is not in the document book. It's an official report prepared by a United States Congressional Committee, U.S. Senate document number 47. This Congressional Committee had inspected the liberated camps at the request of General Eisenhower. It bears USA Exhibit number 222. I would like to quote from the document briefly from page 14, the last paragraph, and from the first two paragraphs on page 15 of the English text. The treatment accorded to these prisoners in the concentration camps was generally as follows. They were herded together in some wooden barracks, not large enough for 1/10 of their number. They were forced to sleep on wooden frames covered with wooden boards in tiers of 2, 3, and even 4, sometimes with no covering, sometimes with a bundle of dirty rags serving both as pallet and coverlet. Their food consisted generally of about 1/2 of a pound of black bread per day and a bowl of watery soup for noon and night, and not always that. Owing to the great numbers crowded into a small space and to the lack of adequate sustenance, lice and vermin multiplied, disease became rampant, and those who did not soon die of disease or torture began the long, slow process of starvation. Notwithstanding the deliberate starvation program inflicted upon these prisoners by lack of adequate food, we found no evidence that the people of Germany as a whole were suffering from any lack of sufficient food or clothing. The contrast was so striking that the only conclusion which we could reach was that the starvation of the inmates of these camps was deliberate. Upon entrance into these camps, newcomers were forced to work either at an adjoining war factory or were placed in commando on various jobs in the vicinity, being returned each night to their stall in the barracks. Generally, a German criminal was placed in charge of each block or shed in which the prisoners slept. Periodically, he would choose the one prisoner of his block who seemed the most alert or intelligent or showed the most leadership qualities. These would report to the guard's room and would never be heard from again. The generally accepted belief of the prisoners was that these were shot or gassed or hanged and then cremated. A refusal to work or an infraction of the rules usually meant flogging and other types of torture, such as having the fingernails pulled out, and in each case usually ended in death after extensive suffering. The policies described constituted a calculated program of torture and extermination on the part of those who were in control of the German government. And passing on to page 11 of the English text, with the second sentence of paragraph 2, a description of Camp Dore at Nordhausen. Page 12, paragraph 1 of the German text, quoting as follows. On the whole, we found this camp to have been operated and administered much in the same manner as Buchenwald had been operated and managed. When the efficiency of the work is decreased as a result of the conditions under which they were required to live, their rations were decreased as punishment. This brought about a vicious circle in which the weak became weaker and were ultimately exterminated. End of the quotation. Such, we say, was the cycle of work, torture, starvation, and death for concentration camp labor labor which the defendant Goering was requesting that more of it be placed at his disposal, which he said had proved very useful, labor which the defendant Spere was anxious to use in the factories under his control. The policy underlying this program, the manner in which it was executed, and the responsibility of the conspirators in connection with it has been dwelt upon at length. And therefore, we should like at this point to discuss the special responsibility of the defendant Sauckel. The defendant Sauckel appointment as plenipotentiary general for manpower is explained probably first of all by his having been an old and trusted Nazi. He is certified in document 2974 PS, dated the 17th of November, 1945, which is already in evidence before this tribunal as USA Exhibit number 15, that he held the following positions, starting with his membership in the NSDAP. He was thereafter a member of the Reichstag. He was Gauleiter of Thuringia. He was a member of the Thuringian legislature. He was Minister of Interior and head of the Thuringian State Ministry. He was Reichsstatthalter for Thuringia. He was SA Obergrubenführer. He was SS Obergrubenführer. He was administrator for the Berlin Sula Waffen and Fahrzeugwerke in 1935. He was head of the Gustavwerke National Sozialistische Industrie Stiftung in 1936, and the honorary head of the foundation. And from the 21st day of March 1942 until 1945, he was the general plenipotentiary for labor allocation. Sauckel's official responsibilities are borne out by evidence. His appointment as plenipotentiary general for manpower was effected by this decree of the 21st of March, 1942, which we have read, and which was signed by Hitler, Lammers, and the defendant Keitel. And by that decree, Sauckel was given authority as well as responsibility subordinate only to that of Hitler and Goering, who was the head of the four-year plan, but subordinate only to those two for all matters relating to recruitment, allocation, and handling of foreign and domestic manpower. And the defendant Goering, to whom Sauckel was directly responsible, abolished the recruitment and allocation agencies of his four-year plan and delegated their powers to the defendant Sauckel, and placed his far-reaching authority as deputy for the four-year plan at Sauckel's disposal. And in document 1666 PS, a second 1666 PS, but of another date, of the 27th of March, 1942, I asked the tribunal to take judicial notice of this original decree, which is published in the 1942 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, at page 180. In pursuance of the Führer's decree of the 21st of March, 1942, I decree as follows. My manpower sections are hereby abolished. Circular letter of the 22nd of October, 1936. Their duties, recruitment and allocation of manpower, regulations for labor conditions are taken over by the Plenipotentiary General for Arbeitseinsatz, who is directly under me. The Plenipotentiary General for Arbeitseinsatz will be responsible for regulating the conditions of labor, wage policy, in parenthesis, employed in the Reich territory, having regard to the requirements of Arbeitseinsatz. The Plenipotentiary General for Arbeitseinsatz is part of the 4-year plan. In cases where new legislation is required or existing laws required to be modified, he will submit appropriate proposals to me. The Plenipotentiary General for Arbeitseinsatz will have at his disposal for the performance of his task the right delegated to me by the Führer for issuing instructions to the higher Reich authorities, their branches, and the party offices, and their associated organisms, and also the Reich Protector, the General Governor, the Commander-in-Chief, and heads of the civil administrations. In the case of ordinances and instructions of fundamental importance, a report is to be submitted to me in advance. End of the quotation. Document number 1903 PS is a Hitler decree of the 30th of September 1942, giving the defendant Sauckel extraordinary powers over the civil and military authorities of the territories occupied by Germany. And we ask that judicial notice be taken by this tribunal of the original decree, which is published in Volume 2, page 510, of the Verfügungen and Ordnungen Bekanntgeben, published by the party chancellery. This decree states as follows: I herewith authorize the Deputy General for the Arbeitseinsatz, Reich Governor and District Leader Gauleiter Fritz Sauckel to take all necessary measures for the enforcement of my decree referring to a Deputy General for the Arbeitseinsatz of the 21st of March, 1942. Reichsgesetzblatt, Roman numeral 1, page 179. According to his own judgment, in the Greater German Reich, in the Protectorate, and in the Government General, as well as in the occupied territories, measures which will safeguard under all circumstances the regulated deployment of labor for the German war economy. For this purpose, he may appoint commissioners to the Bureau of the Military and Civilian Administration. These are subordinated directly to Deputy General for the Arbeitseinsatz. In order to carry out their tasks, they are entitled to issue directives to the competent military and civilian authorities in charge of the Arbeitseinsatz and of wage policy. More detailed directives will be issued by the Deputy General for the Arbeitseinsatz. Führer Headquarters, 30th of September, 1942, the Führer signed Adolf Hitler. End of the quotation. Within 1 month after his appointment, the defendant Sauckel sent the defendant Rosenberg his labor mobilization program. This program, document 016 PS, is already in evidence as USA Exhibit 168. And it envisaged the recruitment by force and the maximum exploitation of the entire labor resources of the conquered areas and of prisoners of war in the interests of the Nazi war machine at the lowest conceivable degree of expenditure to the German state. The defendant Sauckel stated, and I refer now to the bottom of page 6 of the English text of that document, page Roman numeral 6 of the English text, page 9, paragraph 2 of the German text, and quote as follows. It must be emphasized, however, that an additional tremendous number of foreign labor has to be found for the Reich. The greatest pool for that purpose are the occupied territories of the East. Consequently, it is an immediate necessity to use the human reserves of the conquered Soviet territory to the fullest extent. Should we not succeed in obtaining the necessary amount of labor on a voluntary basis, we must immediately institute conscription or forced labor. Apart from the prisoners of war still in the occupied territories, we must therefore requisition skilled or unskilled male and female labor from the Soviet territory from the age of 15 up for the labor mobilization. End of the quotation. Passing to page 11 of the English text, first paragraph, and to page 17, paragraph 4 of the German text, I quote it as follows directly. The complete employment of all prisoners of war, as well as the use of a gigantic number of new foreign civilian workers, men and women, has become an undisputable necessity for the solution of the mobilization of labor program in this war. End of the quotation. The defendant Sauckel proceeded to implement this plan, which he submitted, with certain basic directives. He provided that if voluntary recruitment of foreign workers was unsuccessful, compulsory service should be instituted. Document 3044 PS is Sauckel's, the defendant Sauckel's regulation number 4. It's dated the 7th of May, 1942, and we ask that the tribunal take judicial notice of the original regulation published in volume 2, pages 516 to 527 of the Verfügungen and Ordnungen Bekanntgeben, to which I have previously referred. Reading from page 1, paragraph 3 of the English text. The recruitment of foreign labor will be done on the fundamental basis of volunteering. Where, however, in the occupied territories, the appeal for volunteers does not suffice, obligatory service and drafting must, under all circumstances, be resorted to. This is an indisputable requirement of our labor situation. End of the quotation. Sauckel provided also for the allocation of foreign labor in the order of its importance to the Nazi war machine. And we refer to this document 3044A PS, which is the defendant Sauckel's regulation number 10, and ask that the court take judicial notice of the original regulation published in volume 2, Verfügungen and Ordnungen Bekanntgeben, at pages 531 to 533. Paragraph 3 of this regulation, I quote as follows. The resources of manpower that are available in the occupied territories are to be employed primarily to satisfy the requirements of importance for the war in Germany itself. In allocating the said labor resources in the occupied territories, the following order of priority will be observed. A, labor required for the troops, the occupation authorities, and the civil authorities. B, labor required for the German armaments. C, labor required for food and agriculture. D, labor required for industrial work other than armaments. And E, labor required for industrial work in the interest of the population of the territory in question. The defendant Sauckel and agencies subordinate to him exercised exclusive authority over the recruitment of workers from every area in Europe occupied by, controlled by, or friendly to the German nation. He affirmed himself, the defendant Sauckel did, this authority in a decree, document number 3044 PS, already in evidence as United States Exhibit number 206. And I refer to paragraph 5 on page 1 of the English text of that document, and quoting it directly. The recruitment of foreign labor in the areas occupied by Germany, in allied, friendly, or neutral states will be carried out exclusively by my commissioners or by the competent German military or civil agencies for the tasks of labor mobilization.
Already?
No, I have not, Your Honor, please. We have referred to that decree before, but we have not referred to this portion of it. And passing to paragraph numbered Roman numeral 2, 1A on page 2, and quoting again directly, for the carrying out of recruitment in allied, friendly, or neutral foreign countries, my commissioners are solely responsible. Again, the end of the quotation. In addition, the following defendants who were informed by Sauckel of the quotas of foreign laborers, which he required, collaborated with Sauckel and his agents in filling these quotas. The defendant Keitel, chief of the OKW, which was the Supreme Command, who collaborated with Keitel, with Sauckel. And we refer to document number 3012 PS-1, which is USA Exhibit number 190. This document is the record of a telephone conversation of the chief of the economic staff east of the German army, and it's dated March 11th, 1943. I wish to quote from the first two paragraphs of the document as follows. The plenipotentiary for the Abendzeitsatz, Gauleiter Sauckel, points out to me in an urgent teletype that the Arbeitseinsatz in German agriculture, as well as all the most urgent armament programs ordered by the Fuhrer, make the most rapid procurement of approximately 1 million women and men from the newly occupied territories an imperative necessity. For this purpose, Gauleiter Sauckel demands the shipment of 5,000 workers daily, beginning the 15th of March, 10,000 workers, male and female, beginning 1 April, from the newly occupied territories. And passing down to the next paragraph, in consideration of the extraordinary losses of workers which occurred in German war industry because of the developments of the past months, it is now necessary that the recruiting of workers be taken up again everywhere with all emphasis. The tendency momentarily noticeable in that territory to limit and or entirely stop the Reich recruiting program is absolutely not bearable in view of this state of affairs. Gauleiter Sauckel, who is informed about these events, has because of this turned immediately to General Field Marshal Keitel on 10 March 1943 in a teletype, and has emphasized on this occasion that as in all other occupied territories, there where all other methods fail, by order of the Fuhrer, a certain pressure must be used. At this point, we were prepared to offer a transcript of an interrogation under oath of the defendant Sauckel. The English only of the transcript of the interrogation has been seen by the counsel for the defendant Sauckel. He's had it, however, for some time, and the excerpts upon which we intended to rely were furnished to him as well in German. If I understand the ruling of the tribunal correctly, it would be necessary for us to have furnished the entire record in German.
I think you might use this interrogation as the
Very well.
excerpts have been submitted in German.
Yes, they have, Your Honor. And the entire English text as well.
Very well.
I refer to a transcript of an interrogation under... Passing a little further down on that page. Question. The letters that we have already seen between you and Sauckel do not indicate, do they, any disagreement on your part with the principle of recruiting labor against their will? They indicate, as I remember, that you were opposed to the treatment that was later accorded these workers, that you did not oppose their initial impressment.
Mr. Dodds, I think you ought to read the next two answers in fairness to the defendant Rosenberg. After one where he said he submitted to the necessity of forced impressment.
Very well, I have to read those, Your Honor. Shall I read the answer to this question first?
Did you ever argue with Sauckel?
Question. Did you ever argue with Sauckel that perhaps in view of the fact that the quotas could not be met by voluntary labor, the labor recruiting program be abandoned except for what recruits could be voluntary enrolled? Answer. I couldn't do that because the numbers or allotments that Sauckel had received from the Fuhrer to meet were absolutely binding for him, and I couldn't do anything about that. And then, referring again to the question which I had just read, the question and the answer at the bottom of the page. The question I have already read, the answer is as follows. That is right. In those letters, I mostly discussed the possibility of finding the least harsh methods of handling the matter, whereas in no way I placed myself in opposition to the orders that he was carrying out for the Fuhrer.
I think the tribunal might adjourn now.
Very well, Your Honor.